In an ideal world, the Kraken would just shut out the Oilers every time they go to Edmonton to play them, if for no other reason than just not ever having to listen to whatever that gosh awful noisemaker that they call a goal horn is. What's Kraken, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Kraken don't shut out the Oilers. They don't even beat the Oilers, unfortunately, but they do play a pretty good game, just losing to the Oilers 4-2, with one of those being an empty netter, a close game that the Kraken fought well the entire game long, and honestly, I think it's one of the best games the Kraken have played in quite some time, especially given the opponent it was against, even aside from what the end result may have been. Honestly, I think they played a better, more complete game in this game against the Oilers, even in a loss, than they have in a number of their more recent wins. Certainly more so than either of the two wins against the Penguins, and probably even more so than either of the two wins against the Sabres, with maybe the one game at the start of the homestand against the Kings being the one that stands out as a better played game by the Kraken in that game. A very good Kings team. The Kraken played a full game against them and came out with the win at home. But aside from that one, which is probably the best game they've played in this last stretch, this is the one I'd put up there second. And on top of that, you got some great performances from some of those key, especially younger players, but key parts of the core going forward. Matty Beniers was fantastic in this game, doing a lot of those little things great, starting to throw his body around a little bit more and just being harder on pucks than we've seen him maybe in his entire career so far, but certainly over the last year and a half. Maybe that's Capo Caco rubbing off on him, or maybe it's just the confidence that's come with that line starting to produce, but for whatever reason, Beniers has really started to look good over this last stretch, and even in a game where maybe the goal scoring and the point production wasn't there, though he still does get an assist, it was very evident that a lot of those smaller details of his game, he's feeling a lot of confidence in playing at a high level. And on top of that, you got Shane Wright, who still had a couple moments here and there that you'd like to clean up, but also played a fantastic game. Also, like Beniers, got an assist that was the first one for the Kraken, got them on the board early, and another player that you're looking to take those steps forward, and while there's still plenty more steps for him to take in his rookie season, I mean, not technically speaking, but essentially his rookie season, he is playing very well and at a high level. And, Capo Caco still playing pretty well, helping things move for that line. And although they're not the younger players, a couple of guys that had been struggling lately that were fantastic in this game was that top defensive pairing of Dunn and Larson. Maybe the two best skaters on the ice for the Kraken in this game. Certainly I'd put Dunn up there as number one, and Larson statistically looks pretty good as well, if for no other reason than being next to Dunn in a game like this, where he played that well. With all that having been said, though, and with this being the first half of a back-to-back, let's get right into the game, where another thing that the Kraken have generally been struggling with over the course of the season, and certainly lately, though it's starting to get a little bit better here and there anyway, is the starts of games. Unfortunately for the Kraken, their opponent, even as good as the Oilers have been this season, now leading the Pacific Division, they too have had some struggles in the first period, and while the Kraken definitely didn't make things any easier for themselves by giving the Oilers an early power play that they very nearly score on. Draisaitl, when his Draisaitl spot gets a pass, no chance for Decord, but he puts it off the post. The Kraken are able to kill off the rest of that power play, and then coming right back the other way at 5-on-5, it's Shane Wright starting things off as he gets into the offensive end, throws a puck out net front, where of all players, it's John Hayden still out on the ice, streaking down the middle of it. He crashes into the net, takes the puck with him. I mean, he does try to stop, but gets pushed into the goaltender, takes himself and the puck with him. The puck, though, bounces off of Pickard out to the far side, but Hayden and Pickard go into the net, which then leaves the rest of it open for Tolvanen following up to pick up that puck and put it into to give the Kraken the 1-0 lead. Of course, naturally, this does go to review. It actually even took them a while to call it a good goal on the ice, at which point the Oilers almost immediately challenge it, and while there is quite obviously interference with the goaltender, it's determined that he was pushed in. He tried to stop, but wasn't given the opportunity to avoid the contact fully by the Oilers player following him up. So the goal stands with that contact being deemed having happened because of the defenseman pushing Hayden into the goaltender, and the Kraken still get that 1-goal lead, plus with the failed challenge, they get a power play. Now, the Kraken got a couple of power plays over the course of this game, but it really never went much of anywhere except for towards the end of the first period when they'll get a chance at 5-on-3. They got a little bit more there with the two-man advantage, but we'll get to that. They just don't do anything with this power play. And a couple minutes later, well, not really a couple minutes later, actually quite a few minutes later, the Kraken play a pretty good middle part of the first period, nearly extend the lead a couple of times, taking momentum out of that early lead. But then, as we get towards the end of the period, that's when the Oilers are able to tie things up. 5-on-5, the Oilers are able to tie things up. This one, not really much of anything Decord can do on it. The Oilers get in. It's a fairly harmless shot from the outside of the faceoff circle, from a tight angle closer to the goal line, to the kind of the bottom of the faceoff circle on Joey's blocker side, his right-hand side. But it ends up going off the arm of another Oiler on the way to the net. So as Decord goes up to try and block the high shot, the puck goes down and through his armpit and into the net to tie the game up. And like the Kraken were able to do after scoring their goal to open things up, the Oilers, after tying things here, are able to use it to generate some momentum in their direction. Really their first sustained momentum since the very start of the game, with that press that led to their power play and the chances they got there. But also, like the Kraken momentum, the next goal comes against the pace of play, it comes going the other way, as the Kraken, another rush chance towards the other end of the ice. It's the Beniers line with Dunn and Larson behind them, getting down into the offensive end, something the Kraken really hadn't done much of, if any, since the Oilers tied things up. And it's Beniers getting to a puck behind the Oilers net, and then firing it back up into the high slot, the really high slot, closer to up by the blue line than really anything you'd call the slot, but still the middle of the ice. It's Vince Dunn from way up there. He fires the puck straight down the middle, and it goes through a couple bodies. I think it might have hit Corey Perry's stick on the way. It is a weirdly bouncing puck, and it finds its way to bounce over the pad and pass Pickard into the back of the net to give Dunn the goal, Beniers the assist, and the Kraken get back the lead. And just like with the first goal the Kraken scored, though this time not immediately after it and not as a direct result of the goal the Kraken score, they get a power play not long after this goal goes in, and not long into that power play, it turns into a 5-on-3. Just about 30 seconds into the power play, the Kraken go to 5-on-3. The unfortunate part here is that the first power play was already going to be split almost in half by the intermission, and now the 5-on-3 they have less than a minute of before the intermission, and then they're going to start the second period with like 20 seconds of 5-on-3. So with that interruption, they do get a couple looks. I don't even know if they actually end up with a shot on net at 5-on-3, but they certainly get some looks, get a couple pucks towards the net. There's a block and a clear, and that's really all it takes for the Oilers to get to intermission. And then with just about 20 seconds, save for maybe a rush chance with the two-man advantage, the Kraken had not a great chance to score even with the two-man advantage. And then as they get back to the 5-on-4, the Kraken power play 5-on-4 wasn't getting anywhere in this game. We saw it in the first power play. We saw it at either end of this 5-on-3, and then the Kraken would get one more power play in the third that was maybe the worst of the bunch. They're having a hard time even getting across the blue line with possession, much less setting up and getting anything towards the net. To make matters worse, not long after the power play ends for the Kraken in the second period, the Oilers get a rush chance, and it's on the stick of the worst possible player, Connor McDavid, fresh off his 3-game suspension and eager to, well, let's just say he probably wasn't in the best of mood and a little bit extra competitive coming into this game because of that suspension that had nothing to do with the Kraken. It had more to do with one of their rivals in the Canucks, so thanks again, Vancouver, for that. But McDavid makes no mistake. He puts the shot on net. Decord does make the save, but with that angle of how he makes the save and where the shot was coming from, he expects it to bounce out to one side when instead it kind of just dies off his pad and falls to the side of the net. So he looks the other way for the rebound when it's over here, and McDavid has no trouble. I mean, there's not a lot of players in the NHL that would have much trouble, much less Connor McDavid, of just tapping that rebound into the net to tie things up here early in the second period. I will say on this one that while it is kind of just another awkward, unfortunate bounce that really leads to the goal off that weird rebound from Decord, it really was not a particularly well-played sequence of events from Montour that leads to this chance in the first place. The Kraken, again, the first line for the Kraken, the Beniers line, was out there in the offensive end, had the Oilers pinned, and Montour tries to pass it down to Beniers down in the corner behind the goal line. It just doesn't see an Oiler there and goes tape to tape, turnover in the offensive end. That starts the whole play coming back the other way. And then he is the one that's right there that, there's not much he can do after McDavid gets the shot off. And yeah, he's got Hyman on the far side, so he's kind of trying to block off the pass and leave McDavid to Decord, but I still kind of feel like Hyman's close enough that he could have played McDavid a little bit tighter here, especially given that it is Connor McDavid, and just try to, shut down the best player in the world, but instead he gives McDavid the chance to do whatever he can with the puck, and unfortunately that leads it to ending up in the back of the net. I mean, you also just kind of knew that coming off of that suspension, the hockey gods or whatever, fate was going to intervene at some point and make sure that McDavid at least got on the score sheet, if not got the puck in the net himself. And sure enough, here's the puck just dropping dead off a weird rebound right in front what's basically empty net and a goaltender looking the other way for McDavid to have the tap-in goal. Aside from that, though, and one other pretty big head-scratcher of a moment from the Kraken defensively midway through the second period, they play the Oilers very well in the second period, one of their better second periods in quite some time. They don't really give them much of anything offensively, certainly not much dangerous, and nothing near dangerous enough to get past Decord. Unfortunately, that one big head-scratcher of a moment was a pretty bad one, as the Kraken come down the ice on a rush, and just, I don't know if they didn't count how many Oilers were on the ice or what the deal was, but they all skate past the Oilers bench with only 4 Oilers on the ice, as Corey Perry was a little bit slower on his change and he hops out onto the ice behind everyone else. The Kraken don't realize he's there, so when Andrei Burakovsky puts a shot off the pad of Pickard and it goes right to an Oiler, he looks down the ice and sees Corey Perry all alone with Decord on the far end. The pass gets through to the far blue line where, I mean, excuse how blurry the screenshot is, but I think you can pretty well see just how wide open he was and just how much time he has on this breakaway as he skates in. And Decord, I mean, pick your poison. He tries to go for the poke check, and right at that moment is when Perry puts it through the 5-hole to give the Oilers the 3-2 lead. So Perry, the cherry picker, gets the Oilers the 3-2 lead, and it's a lead that they would never surrender. Again, the Kraken do keep things pretty tight defensively after that, but they just allowed Perry to get a little too sneaky behind them. I don't know if it was an intentional play on his part to wait for the Kraken to go past before coming on the ice a little bit late, if that's maybe something he's done before, or if he just, a weird change and it happened to work out that he comes on late, sees the turnover, and then just stands there hoping the puck will get to him. Sure enough, it does. With all the time in the world, he's able to make it count. And from there, the Kraken do have one press and a quick response to try to even things back up. But when that doesn't work, the rest of the second period, not much of anything notable happens. There's really no good chances at either end of the ice. So we go to a third period where the Kraken get an early power play. But like I said, this one does not go anywhere. They barely even get across the blue line. And even at that, I'm not sure that they had control across the blue line really at any point during this power play. So then as we get into the meat of the third period, the Kraken actually play pretty well at 5-on-5. They get the vast majority of the offensive zone time, some decent chances, a lot of pucks towards the net, but just aren't able to get anything dangerous enough to get it past Pickard. A couple of times it looks like they might have something dangerous, they just can't get a bounce to go their way. And as we get late into it, the more desperate the Kraken get to press, it opens a couple of chances for the Oilers the other way. They aren't able to capitalize on any of those to extend the lead. Eventually, the Kraken do pull Decord with a couple minutes left to get the extra skater out, get some good zone time. Again, a couple pucks towards the net, mostly blocked on the way, maybe a save or two here and there. And through a little bit of chaos in the corner, eventually it's Ekholm who finds the empty net from pretty much 200 feet away to finish this one off in the last minute. So one more time then, a really well played, pretty much 60-minute effort from the Kraken in this one, maybe aside from the first minute or two and about 10 seconds there in the middle of the second where they completely forget that Corey Perry even exists. But in the end, it's the 2 bad bounces and that moment with Corey Perry that cost the Kraken this game. Still, it's maybe, given the way things have gone this season, at this point, the ideal outcome. They play really well against a good team. Their young players play especially well. Maybe their best skaters were the 2 young, hopefully future star centers and your top pairing defense, who, again, aren't young, but really could have used a game like this against a good team after some of the games that they've had more recently. Even when the Kraken do win, that pair has been, well, as I said in the last one, kind of fighting it. So to have a game like this where they played well against a good and especially good offensively opponent, you got to see a lot of the things that you want to see, and the Kraken still got closer to better draft lottery odds. Now, as far as the other thing that might be worth discussing here, why the Kraken choose to have, with a back-to-back, Decord start against the better team and then Grubauer up next against the Ducks. Well, for one thing, you really shouldn't need to have your best goaltender playing against the Ducks in order to get a win if you're looking to win every game. And the other is that, if you're at a point in the season where all you really need to do is keep up kind of a 500 to maybe slightly above 500 pace in order to coast your way into a playoff spot wherever you might be in the standings, then yeah, you probably play your top goaltender against the worst team to just lock in 2 points there and hope for the best with your backup against the better team. But you're at a point right now where for the Kraken, who haven't given up on the season, and it would not be much fun to watch them if they had, and yeah, maybe there's some of the players who any given game some people might think have already given up. The point is, the players all still have to believe that they have a chance until they're mathematically eliminated. The coaching staff, front office, all of them are trying to win every game they can to try and get back into this. So with that being the case, you are kind of at a point where if you want to get back into things or give yourself any kind of chance to get back into them, you have to give yourself the best chance of winning every game you can, and that means playing your top goaltender against the more difficult opponents, and then just counting on your backup to not screw things up against the bad ones. And again, generally speaking, I think Grubauer's played fairly well this season. He just hasn't gotten very much help in front of him, aside from a start or two. I mean, that one start against the Sharks obviously is going to stand out for his entire career, but generally he's, I think, played a lot better than his stats suggest. The point is, the Kraken are kind of in a spot where they need to try to win every game if they want any chance. And I suppose the flip side is that if you play your better goaltender against the better team and still don't win, then having your worst goaltender against the worst team gives you a better chance to lose that one, and that helps the tank for people that are more interested in the team tanking right now to get the best possible draft odds. I suppose put simply then, and I kind of wish I thought about this before I answered a comment on the previous video, saying that I thought they would start Grubauer in this game and then Decord against the Ducks and make sure that they won that one. But really the worst possible thing the Kraken can do at this point in the season, with especially where they're at, is try to play 500 hockey, make sure that they win every other game, and pick up somewhere around 50 to 60% of the remaining points. At that point, all you're doing is treading water in the middle of the pack, maybe working your way slightly up, but not close enough to get into one of those wild card spots. And then at the end of it, you not only are not in the playoffs, but don't really have a very good chance at getting a high first round pick. Or high in all of the rounds, but obviously the first round is the one you're focused on. And especially in a draft like this one, that at least right now, from the sounds of it, and I'm not a scout, so I haven't really looked a lot into what the draft class looks like, but all indications are this is a draft that has some more skill at the top end, but the top end is, well, it's just not as deep of a draft. We'll put it that way. The top end is the top end, and it drops off fairly quick, so having a higher end first round pick might make a bit more of a difference than maybe even this last year's draft, for example. Now, with that being said, Decord's been so good for the Kraken in net that he might not give them any choice other than to be about a 500 team the rest of the way, unless they totally fire sale at the deadline and don't get anything but picks, because when Ron Francis trades for players, well, he's pretty good at trading for players. So as long as he just trades for picks and brings up AHL guys, yeah, I don't see any way the Kraken end up with a high round pick unless they really hit on the odds. But the odds certainly get worse the more the Kraken win if they don't go on some sort of crazy run, which is very, very unlikely. But anyway, we can talk about that more down the road. The Four Nations break will give quite a bit of a chance to catch up on some other stuff I've been working on. I will be gone for a good chunk of it, but there should be time to get some other stuff, kind of an outlook on what the Kraken could do going forward, depending on where they're at that point. There's only a few games between now and then, so we'll have some time to talk about that in the future. Again, with a back-to-back, maybe even the future is the next one, but let's close things out here with the Kraken 3 stars. As always, brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you do want to help decide Kraken 3 stars after every game, you can help support a little bit more than you already are by watching to this point by going to the link down below and supporting on Patreon as well. With the first star, I gotta go with Matty Beniers. I've already talked about towards the beginning of the video how well he played in this game. It's a lot of the smaller things that aren't necessarily going to stand out to everyone, and certainly I will say stand out a lot more when you're able to watch the game live and see the whole ice rather than just on TV. But even some of the replays they showed, you can really see him starting to have a lot more confidence, if nothing else, and that's allowing him to be stronger on the puck and just generally is playing a lot better and with a lot more confidence ever since that line is taken off with the introduction of Kakko to it. And again, it certainly hasn't been every game that's gone well for that line or even Beniers as an individual since that trade was made, but you can see the progress and the difference that their game has had since Kakko joining, or really even just over the course of the season, Beniers has taken some big steps this year. Even if the goal scoring isn't quite there, the points production hasn't quite made the leaps and bounds forward that we kind of hoped it would after the slump last year. But a lot of that other stuff, he is playing a lot better, and the pieces are there where the points will eventually start to follow here in the near future, especially once the rest of the team gets going, and it's not just that line that's getting all of the focus from opposing teams. And that's another part of what I've been impressed with, especially in this game from Beniers, that he is against the best line, especially over this last stretch, that every team has to offer. And in this case, that was a pretty loaded up McDavid line for most of the game, and Beniers, Kakko, and Schwartz looked like they could handle every piece of it. Then for the second star, I gotta go with Vince Dunn. He does get another goal in this game, the second straight game with a goal, but it isn't even necessarily that part of it that I want to give him a star for. It's really more the other end of things, where he was, and that pair in general, were much more solid defensively against somewhat better matchup in this game. The Oilers as a whole are certainly a better team than the Penguins, though they frequently are out on the ice against the top lines of teams, and against the Penguins, that still is a pretty good top line with Crosby. Not quite to the same level as like McDavid and Draisaitl. Either way, the point is that Dunn and Larson as a pair, and Dunn specifically, were much better defensively in this game than they really have been for the last week or two, certainly generally speaking, but in pretty much any of the last games in the week or two, this was their best game at the defensive end of things. Then for the third star, I'm going to finish things out with John Hayden as the third star. He does also get an assist in this game, his first assist of the season. Not a huge sample size to go off, but now a goal and an assist for him. And just generally, he brings something to the team. We talked about it the last time he got a star when he got that goal, but he brings something to this team that they either don't have much of, or at least him also bringing some of that energy and physicality seems to have re-energized, at least at points in the game, this team in a way that, well, they certainly could have used. And that's not to say that some of the other guys that have provided those aspects of the game in the past for the Kraken, or could still be providing them now, like the Brandon Tanevs, Yanni Gourde when he's healthy, or even Ty Cartier, who's getting scratched for Hayden to play, couldn't still be providing those things for the Kraken, or even necessarily that they aren't. But Hayden is certainly the guy that seems to have definitely the most drive, the most energy, the most compete, really, of maybe even anybody on the team outside of Matty Beniers and that line, certainly on a consistent basis. And some of that probably is that Hayden, unlike a lot of those guys, is trying to prove that he belongs at the NHL level. He's trying to earn more time at the NHL level. And I mean, he's smart enough to know that with guys like, well, Tanev and Gourde potentially on the way out of the trade deadline, the opportunity is there if he earns it for him to fill that role at least the rest of the season. And if he does well enough, and depending on what happens in free agency or at the trade deadline, maybe it's a role that he could fill into the future, at least at times for the Kraken on the fourth line. So for whatever the reason is, the energy and compete level that Hayden has brought is something the Kraken could certainly use more of, and it's just fun to see. It does result in that this primary assist on that first goal for the Kraken in this one. And there's a few other moments in the game where he's the first one back to a puck, either on the back check or the forward check. And you're just like, oh, what's John Hayden doing there? But there he is, getting into the play at every possible moment that he can. But as always, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below about this game, who your 3 stars would be, especially the third star, I think, is up for some discussion. I mean, I like being able to mention what Hayden is doing and that kind of stuff, but there are some other players that had good games. I already mentioned Adam Larson had a good game. Kaapo Kakko did some things well. I mean, Jared McCann still, while it seems like he's playing hurt, is playing fairly well now with Shane Wright on that line. Ellie Tolvanen had another goal, his second goal in the second game, so yeah, there's definitely some other guys that even in a loss I think were worthy. Decord had a fine game by his standards, a fairly humdrum one, but he's had some good saves in there, so yeah, plenty of other options. Let me know what you think, and until next time, which will be pretty soon, tomorrow against the Ducks, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.